On a humid summer morning in rural Georgia, a young mother stepped out of her modest home to hang laundry on the line. The cicadas were already singing their relentless chorus. The air hung thick with moisture and the promise of afternoon thunderstorms. She called for her children. The oldest appeared at the screen door, but the youngest, a boy of just 4 years old, did not come running from the yard where he had been playing moments before. His red plastic truck lay abandoned in the dirt. The swing on the old oak tree moved slightly in the breeze, empty. By noon, every law enforcement officer in 3 counties would be searching the woods and fields surrounding that small house. By nightfall, a community would be holding its breath. And in the years that followed, one question would hang over that town like morning fog that never quite burned away. What happened to little Christopher Bennett on that June morning in 2008? And why did it take 17 years for the truth to finally surface? The town of Milledgeville sits in the heart of Georgia, roughly 90 miles southeast of Atlanta. Once the state capital, it carries the quiet dignity of faded importance. Wide streets lined with antebellum homes give way to more modest neighborhoods where working families live paycheck to paycheck. In 2008, the population hovered around 18,000. Everyone knew everyone, or at least knew someone who did. The kind of place where people still waved from their porches and left doors unlocked. Where a missing child was not something that happened to your neighbors. Where evil was supposed to be somewhere else, something you saw on the evening news from Atlanta or Savannah, not something that walked your streets or sat across from you at the dinner table. Christopher Bennett was 4 years old that summer. His mother, Rachel Bennett, was 26. She worked part-time at the Piggly Wiggly on the edge of town, stocking shelves in the early morning hours before her children woke. Christopher's older sister, Emma, was 7. Their father, Michael Bennett, worked construction when he could find it. The economy had turned sour. Jobs were scarce. Tension hung in the household like humidity before a storm. Money was tight. Arguments were frequent. But the children were loved, by all accounts. Rachel kept them clean and fed. She read to them at night. She took them to the library on Saturdays when she could afford the gas to drive the 6 miles into town. The house where they lived sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by pine woods on 3 sides. The nearest neighbor was a 1/4 mile down the road. The property belonged to Michael's uncle, who let them live there for almost nothing. It was a small ranch-style house, white paint peeling in places, with a sagging front porch and a yard that was more dirt than grass. A tire swing hung from the massive oak tree in the side yard. Christopher loved that swing. He would pump his small legs for hours, trying to go higher, laughing when the wind caught his hair. June 17, 2008, dawned clear and already warm. Rachel had worked the early shift, arriving home just after 7 in the morning. Michael had left for a job site around 6, or so he said later. The children were still asleep when Rachel came home. She showered, started a load of laundry, and made breakfast. By 8:30, both children were awake. Emma sat at the small kitchen table eating cereal and watching cartoons on the old television in the living room. Christopher was restless, as 4-year-old boys often are. He wanted to go outside. Rachel told him he could play in the yard while she hung the wet clothes on the line. She watched him run out the back door, his small feet kicking up dust. He grabbed his favorite red truck from where it sat near the porch steps. She heard him making engine noises as he pushed it through the dirt, creating roads in his imagination. The morning was peaceful. Birds called from the tree line. The air smelled of pine and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle that grew wild along the property's edge. Rachel carried the laundry basket to the clothesline that stretched between 2 metal poles in the side yard. She could see Christopher from there, playing near the oak tree, maybe 30 feet away. She hung towels, sheets, small shirts and pants. The work took perhaps 15 minutes. She hummed quietly to herself. The radio inside was playing country music through the open window. She bent to pick up another towel from the basket. When she straightened and looked toward the oak tree, Christopher was gone. The red truck lay on its side in the dirt. The swing moved slightly, as if someone had just dismounted. Rachel called his name, no answer. She walked toward the tree, still holding a wet towel. She called again, louder this time. Children hide, she told herself. They play games. She checked behind the tree, behind the small garden shed at the edge of the yard. She walked to the front of the house, calling continuously now. Her voice had changed. Anyone who has ever been a parent knows that sound. The shift from casual calling to the edge of panic. She went back inside. Emma looked up from her cereal. "Where's Christopher?" Rachel asked. Emma shrugged. "Outside." Rachel ran back out. She circled the house. She called into the woods. The pine trees stood silent and thick. No small voice answered. She ran to the road, looked both directions down the empty gravel stretch. Nothing. By 9:15 she had called Michael. By 9:30 she had called the sheriff's department. By 9:45 the first deputy was pulling up the long driveway, dust rising behind his cruiser like smoke. Deputy James Holloway had been with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Department for 12 years. He had handled domestic disputes, traffic accidents, the occasional burglary. He had never handled a missing child. He arrived to find Rachel Bennett standing in the yard, arms wrapped around herself despite the heat, calling her son's name over and over. Deputy Holloway took down the basic information: child's name, age, description. Christopher was small for 4, maybe 35 pounds, with light brown hair and blue eyes. He was wearing a yellow t-shirt and blue shorts. No shoes. He often played barefoot in the yard. The deputy walked the property. He noted the red truck in the dirt, the swing hanging motionless now. He walked into the tree line, calling Christopher's name. The woods were dense with undergrowth. A child could wander in there and become disoriented quickly, but a 4-year-old barefoot wouldn't go far. The ground was littered with pine needles and fallen branches. Sharp, uncomfortable. Deputy Holloway walked perhaps 100 yards in each direction. He found no small footprints. No disturbance in the brush. No torn clothing on branches. Nothing. Michael Bennett arrived home around 10:30. He had been working at a site in Eataunton, he said, about 20 miles away. Deputy Holloway watched him pull up in his pickup truck, watched him get out and go to his wife. Michael was 31, tall and lean, with work-hardened hands and a sunburn across his neck. He looked at the deputy. "You find him yet?" His voice was steady, almost flat. Deputy Holloway noted this later in his report. The father seemed calm, unusually so. By noon, the search had expanded dramatically. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation had been notified. Volunteers from the community began arriving. Within hours, more than 100 people were walking grid patterns through the woods surrounding the Bennett property. They called Christopher's name until their voices grew hoarse. They looked in culverts and abandoned wells. They checked neighboring properties and outbuildings. Search and rescue teams arrived with dogs. The dogs were given Christopher's clothing to scent. They tracked to the edge of the woods behind the house, then seemed to lose the trail. One handler said the dogs indicated the scent simply stopped, as if the child had vanished into the air. The afternoon brought television news crews from Macon and Augusta. By evening, the story was on Atlanta stations. Missing 4-year-old, rural Georgia, vanished from his own yard while his mother hung laundry 30 feet away. The community rallied. Churches organized prayer vigils. Local businesses donated water and food for searchers. Flyers with Christopher's picture appeared on every telephone pole and storefront window in Milledgeville. The image showed a smiling boy with a gap-toothed grin, holding a stuffed dinosaur. Investigators interviewed the family separately. Rachel Bennett answered every question, her voice breaking repeatedly. She described the morning in exhaustive detail: what time she woke, what Christopher ate for breakfast, what he was wearing, how long she had her back turned. "Maybe 15 minutes, she said. Maybe 20, I don't know. I wasn't watching the clock. I should have been watching him. She dissolved into tears that the investigators said seemed genuine, racking, desperate. Michael Bennett's interview was different. He sat across from Detective Sarah Chen of the GBI with his hands folded on the table. He answered questions in a measured tone. Yes, he had been at work in Eataunton. He had arrived at the site around 7 in the morning. His foreman could verify. No, he had not come home during the day. No, he could not think of anyone who would want to harm his son. No, there had been no strangers around the property lately. No, Christopher did not wander off. He was a good boy, listened to his mother. Detective Chen noted that Michael made eye contact throughout the interview, that his story never wavered, that he asked appropriate questions about the search. But she also noted something else in her report, something she would think about in the years to come. Subject showed no visible emotional distress. No tears. Voice remained level throughout. When asked how he felt about his son's disappearance, he said, "I feel terrible." But his affect did not match his words. The search continued through the night. Floodlights were set up. Teams with thermal imaging equipment swept the woods. Divers checked the small creek that ran through the property about half a mile from the house. They found nothing. As dawn broke on June 18th, more than 300 people had searched an area covering several square miles. No trace of Christopher Bennett had been found. No clothing. No footprints. No sign of struggle. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed him whole. Those who knew the family said Rachel and Michael had been having problems. Marriage problems. Money problems. Neighbors reported hearing arguments. Raised voices carrying through open windows on warm evenings. But nothing that seemed unusual for a young couple struggling to make ends meet during hard times. Nothing that suggested violence. Nothing that explained a missing child. Clear's throat, Rachel's mother, who lived in Macon, told investigators that Rachel had mentioned feeling overwhelmed. That Michael drank sometimes. That he had a temper. But she never suggested Rachel or the children were in danger. She never saw bruises, never heard anything that made her worry beyond the normal concerns of a mother watching her daughter struggle in a difficult marriage. The days turned into weeks. The massive search operation scaled down. Volunteers returned to their jobs and families. The news crews packed up their satellite trucks and moved on to other stories. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise. They conducted polygraph examinations. Rachel Bennett passed without issue. Michael Bennett's results were inconclusive. Not a failure, investigators noted, but not a clear pass either. The examiner reported that Michael showed physiological responses to certain questions that were difficult to interpret. When asked if he knew where Christopher was, his response spiked. When asked if he had harmed his son, the results were ambiguous. Investigators dug deeper into Michael's background. They discovered he had been arrested twice in his early 20s, once for disorderly conduct outside a bar, once for domestic dispute with a previous girlfriend, though charges were never filed. Nothing that screamed violent offender, nothing that explained a vanished child, but enough to keep him firmly in the circle of suspicion. They examined his truck. Forensic teams went over every inch of the vehicle. They found nothing unusual. Construction debris, fast food wrappers, a child's jacket in the back seat, no blood, no evidence of recent cleaning beyond normal dirt and dust. They verified his alibi. The foreman at the Eataunton site confirmed Michael had arrived around 7 and worked until he got the call about Christopher around 9:30. The timeline was tight but possible. The drive from the house to the work site took approximately 25 minutes. If Michael had left home at 6:30, he could have arrived by 7. But when investigators checked the odometer readings and calculated distances, something didn't quite align. Michael's truck had more miles on it than the simple round trip from home to work and back would account for, about 40 extra miles. When confronted with this discrepancy, Michael said he had driven around after getting the call about Christopher, looking along roads and checking places the boy might have wandered. He couldn't remember exactly where. He was panicked, he said, not thinking clearly. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves. The father's story had too many soft edges, too many gaps, but whispers and suspicions don't make a case. They had no body, no witness, no evidence of a crime, and without any of those things they had nothing to charge him with. The investigation continued, but it was walking in circles now, covering the same ground over and over, finding nothing new. By August, the active search had effectively ended. Tips still came in. Reported sightings of a boy matching Christopher's description in convenience stores or shopping centers across Georgia and neighboring states. Each one was investigated. Each one led nowhere. Rachel Bennett appeared on local television, pleading for information. Her face was gaunt. Dark circles hung under her eyes. She had lost weight. She spoke directly into the camera, her voice barely above a whisper. "If someone has my baby, please bring him home. Please, he's just a little boy. He needs his mama, please." Michael Bennett stood beside her during these appearances, his hand on her shoulder. His face was unreadable, stone. When reporters asked him questions, his answers were brief. "We're cooperating fully with investigators. We just want Christopher home." Always the same, always measured. Those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that sick uncertainty in your gut while your brain insists everything is fine, might understand what Rachel Bennett was beginning to feel during those long summer months. The case went cold, not officially, as law enforcement never closes a missing child case, but the active investigation slowed to a crawl. Detectives moved on to other cases. The file remained open, but it gathered dust. The town of Milledgeville tried to return to normal, but Christopher's face still stared out from posters in store windows, sun faded and curling at the edges. A reminder, a wound that wouldn't heal. Rachel and Michael's marriage deteriorated through the fall and winter of 2008. The silence between them grew heavier. Rachel threw herself into keeping Christopher's case in the public eye. She organized vigils on the 17th of every month. She maintained a Facebook page with updates and pleas for information. Michael withdrew. He spent longer hours at work sites. He stopped attending the vigils. When he was home, he was distant, silent. Rachel would later tell counselors that she felt like she was living with a stranger, that the man she had married had disappeared along with her son. Emma, the older sister, had nightmares. She began drawing pictures in school that concerned her teachers, dark scribbles, storms, a small figure alone in the woods. When the school counselor asked about the drawings, Emma said she dreamed about Christopher calling for help, said she could hear him but couldn't find him. The counselor contacted Child Protective Services. A social worker visited the home. She spoke with Emma alone, asked gentle questions. Emma said she missed her brother. Said her daddy was sad all the time now. Said her mama cried at night. Nothing overtly alarming, nothing actionable, but the social worker noted that Emma seemed anxious, that she was too quiet for a child her age, too watchful. In March of 2009, Rachel and Michael separated. Rachel moved with Emma to a small apartment in Milledgeville. Michael stayed in the house at the end of the gravel drive. The divorce proceedings were bitter. Rachel sought sole custody of Emma. Michael fought her. In court documents, Rachel's attorney hinted at suspicions regarding Christopher's disappearance. Michael's attorney called this slander and filed a motion to strike the allegations. The judge ruled that without charges filed or evidence presented, such suggestions were prejudicial and inadmissible. The divorce was finalized in July of 2009. Emma went to live primarily with Rachel. Michael had supervised visitation every other weekend. The years passed slowly. 2010, 2011, 2012. Christopher Bennett remained missing. The case was featured on local crime shows and podcasts. Amateur investigators online dissected every detail, every timeline, every inconsistency. Theories proliferated: an intruder from the woods, a stranger in a vehicle who happened upon the property, an accident that Michael covered up in panic, murder, accidental harm, abduction. The theories were endless and led nowhere. Rachel rebuilt her life as best she could. She found full-time work at a medical office. She took online courses at night, working toward a degree. Emma grew from a quiet 7-year-old into a teenager who carried sadness like a heavy coat she could never quite shed. She excelled in school. She was polite and helpful. Teachers said she seemed older than her years, burdened. For those who have ever seen a child forced to grow up too fast, forced to carry grief too large for their small shoulders, Emma Bennett was that child. Michael remained in the area, working construction jobs, living alone in the house where Christopher had vanished. He dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Those who worked with him said he did his job well, showed up on time, didn't talk much, kept to himself. He never spoke about Christopher. If someone new to a crew asked about the missing child case from years ago, the other workers would shake their heads and change the subject. Everyone knew. No one talked about it, not to Michael. In 2015, Rachel remarried. A good man, she would later say, who understood her grief and didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. They had a daughter together. Emma gained a baby sister. Life moved forward in the way that life does, even when part of your heart remains trapped in a single terrible moment 7 years in the past. Rachel still kept the Facebook page for Christopher, still posted on his birthday and the anniversary of his disappearance, still held out a thread of hope, so thin it was nearly invisible. Emma turned 16 in 2017. She was in counseling, had been for years. The therapist was patient and kind. They talked about grief and trauma, about the particular weight of not knowing, about living with questions that have no answers. In one session in early 2018, Emma said something that made the therapist pause. She said she remembered more about the day Christopher disappeared than she had told anyone. The therapist asked what she meant. Emma said she wasn't sure if it was a real memory or something she had dreamed. She was 7 when it happened. 10 years had passed. Memory is a tricky thing. The therapist, Dr. Jennifer Morrison, asked Emma if she wanted to talk about this memory. Emma nodded. She said she remembered waking up early that morning before her mother came home from work. Said she heard her father's truck start, heard it drive away. Then later, maybe an hour or two, she heard it come back. She stayed in bed. She was half asleep. She heard voices outside, her father's voice. Raised, angry, she couldn't make out the words. Then silence. Then the truck started again. Then, sometime after that, her mother came home. Emma said she had never been sure if this was real or a dream. She was afraid to say anything because she didn't want to get her father in trouble if she was wrong. Dr. Morrison asked Emma if she would be comfortable sharing this memory with investigators. Emma thought about it for a long time. Finally, she said yes. She said she was tired of not knowing, tired of wondering, tired of carrying this weight. Dr. Morrison contacted the Baldwin County Sheriff's Department. The case was reassigned to a new detective, Marcus Webb, who had joined the department in 2012. Detective Webb was young and hungry. He looked at cold cases like puzzles waiting to be solved. He had reviewed the Christopher Bennett file multiple times over the years, frustrated by the gaps and inconsistencies. When he received the call from Dr. Morrison about Emma's statement, Detective Webb felt the first spark of real progress in a decade. He met with Emma in April of 2018 with her mother and stepfather present. Emma, now 16, was articulate and thoughtful. She described what she remembered: the sound of the truck, the angry voice, the timing. Detective Webb asked careful questions. Did she see anything? No. Did she recognize the other voice? She didn't think there was another voice. Just her father, sounding angry. Talking to someone or talking to himself, she couldn't be sure. It wasn't much. A child's half-remembered dream from 10 years ago. It wouldn't hold up in court on its own, but it was enough to make Detective Webb pull the old case file and look at the timeline again. Michael Bennett said he left for work at 6. The foreman confirmed he arrived at the Taunton site at 7, but Emma heard the truck leave and then return. If that was accurate, if it wasn't a dream, then Michael's timeline had a hole in it, a gap large enough to drive a truck through. Detective Webb began quietly reinvestigating. He tracked down everyone who had been interviewed in 2008. Many still lived in the area. He spoke with neighbors who had lived near the Bennett property. One woman, elderly now and frail, remembered something she hadn't thought important at the time. She said she had been awake early that June morning, couldn't sleep because of the heat. She had walked out to her porch to get the newspaper. She lived down the road from the Bennetts, about a quarter mile. She heard a vehicle go past around 6:30, heard it come back maybe 30 minutes later. She didn't think anything of it. Michael Bennett often left for work early, but she remembered hearing the vehicle twice, coming and going. Detective Webb checked the old forensic reports on Michael's truck. He requested that the evidence, which had been stored all these years, be re-examined with newer technology. Forensic science had advanced significantly in 10 years. Techniques that didn't exist in 2008 were now standard. The truck had been released back to Michael in 2009 when no charges were filed. But samples had been taken. Soil samples from the tires, fiber samples from the seats and bed. These had been cataloged and stored. The new analysis revealed something interesting. The soil samples from the tires didn't match the soil at the Taunton worksite. They didn't match the soil at the Bennett property either. The mineral composition was different. Forensic geologists compared the samples to soil maps of the region. The closest match was to an area about 12 miles south of the Bennett property, near a wildlife management area that was largely undeveloped woodland. Detective Webb obtained search warrants. In July of 2018, teams returned to the woods. This time they had specific areas to search, identified by the soil analysis. They brought ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, forensic anthropologists. On the third day of searching, July 19, 2018, a dog alerted to a location beneath a fallen oak tree deep in the woods. The area was overgrown with kudzu and wild muscadine vines. Investigators carefully excavated. 3 feet down, they found the small remains of Christopher Bennett, wrapped in a blue tarp and buried in a shallow grave. The medical examiner determined that Christopher had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The injury pattern was consistent with a fall or a blow from a hard surface. Given the advanced decomposition, an exact cause could not be determined with certainty, but the manner of death was ruled homicide. The blue tarp was analyzed. It was the same type of tarp commonly used on construction sites. Fibers matched fibers found in the bed of Michael Bennett's truck 10 years earlier. On July 23, 2018, Detective Webb obtained an arrest warrant for Michael Bennett. He was taken into custody at a construction site in Sparta, Georgia, where he was working. Workers at the site said Michael didn't resist, didn't say anything, just put down his tools and held out his hands for the cuffs. His face, they said, showed nothing. No surprise, no fear, nothing at all. The arrest made national news. The case that had haunted a small Georgia town for a decade finally had answers, or at least the beginning of answers. Rachel Bennett released a statement through her attorney. "We are devastated that our worst fears have been confirmed. Christopher deserved so much better. We will see that justice is done." Emma did not make any public statements. Dr. Morrison said the girl was struggling with guilt, with the weight of her memory, with the knowledge that her words had led to her father's arrest and her brother's grave. Michael Bennett was charged with felony murder and concealing a death. He was held without bond. His attorney, a public defender named Thomas Crane, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the soil analysis was not definitive, that a child's decade-old memory was unreliable, but the prosecution had more. They had the timeline inconsistencies. They had the extra mileage on the truck. They had the soil analysis. They had Emma's statement. They had the location of the body in an area that matched the soil from Michael's tires. Piece by piece, they built a case. The theory as presented by prosecutors was this. On the morning of June 17, 2008, Michael Bennett had an argument with his son. Perhaps Christopher was being loud. Perhaps he was misbehaving. Michael had a temper, this much was documented. In a moment of rage, Michael struck the boy. Perhaps he pushed him. Perhaps Christopher fell and hit his head on something hard, the porch steps, a rock. The exact mechanism was unknowable, but the result was catastrophic. Christopher was grievously injured or killed. Michael panicked. Rachel was due home soon. He made a terrible choice. He wrapped his son in a tarp from his truck. He drove south into the wildlife management area, a place he knew from hunting years before. He buried Christopher in a shallow grave beneath a fallen oak. He drove back home. He changed his clothes. He left again, this time heading to the Eataunton worksite, arriving just in time to establish his alibi. When Rachel called him about Christopher being missing, he drove home and played the role of concerned father. And he played that role for 10 years. The trial began in March of 2019. The courtroom in Milledgeville was packed every day. Rachel sat in the front row with Emma beside her. Michael sat at the defense table, his face still showing that same flat calm that had disturbed investigators a decade earlier. Witnesses testified. The forensic experts explained the soil analysis. The medical examiner described the injury to Christopher's skull. The foreman from the Eataunton site testified about Michael's arrival time. The neighbor testified about hearing the vehicle pass twice that morning. Emma took the stand. She was 17 now, a senior in high school. She spoke in a quiet voice but never wavered. She described what she remembered. The defense attorney cross-examined gently, perhaps aware of how it would look to attack a grieving sister. He suggested her memory might be confused, that children often dream about traumatic events. Emma said she understood that, said she had questioned it herself for years, but she was certain. She heard the truck leave and return that morning. She heard her father's angry voice. Michael Bennett did not testify. His attorney called character witnesses who said Michael was a good worker, reliable, not violent. But the prosecution's case was strong. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on both counts. Michael Bennett showed no reaction. Rachel Bennett wept quietly. Emma sat rigid and pale. At sentencing, the judge noted the particularly heinous nature of the crime. Not just the taking of a child's life, but the calculated deception that followed. The years of letting Rachel wonder and grieve. The years of letting Emma grow up without her brother, without answers. Michael Bennett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, he looked once toward where Rachel and Emma sat. His expression was unreadable. He said nothing. In the aftermath, investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation released a statement praising Emma's courage. They acknowledged that, without her coming forward, the case might never have been solved. They encouraged anyone with information about old cases to speak up, no matter how much time had passed. Rachel Bennett scattered Christopher's ashes in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. She said she finally had the closure she needed, though closure felt like an inadequate word for the end of such a long nightmare. Emma Bennett graduated high school in the spring of 2019. She gave a speech at her graduation about resilience and finding your voice. She never mentioned her brother by name, but everyone knew what she was talking about. She said that truth matters, that speaking up matters, even when you're afraid, even when you're not sure, even when it takes 10 years to find the courage. The case remains a reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight, how someone can sit across the dinner table from you, can sleep beside you, can raise your surviving child, all while carrying the darkest secret. For those who have ever felt that small voice of doubt about someone close to you, the Christopher Bennett case stands as validation. Trust your instincts. Ask the hard questions. Push for truth even when it's uncomfortable. Michael Bennett has never confessed. He maintains his innocence from prison, though he has given no alternative explanation for the evidence against him. He has had no contact with Emma since his arrest. Rachel has said publicly that she will never forgive him, not for Christopher's death, which she believes may have been a terrible accident born of rage, but for the deception, for letting her search, for letting her wonder, for letting her believe her baby might still be alive somewhere, when he had been in a shallow grave all along. Christopher Bennett would have been 21 years old in 2025. His mother keeps a photograph of him on her mantle, the same picture that appeared on all those missing posters. A smiling 4-year-old with a gap-toothed grin holding a stuffed dinosaur, frozen forever in that one innocent moment before everything changed. Clear's throat, the case reminds us that justice, even when delayed, still matters. That truth, even when it takes 17 years to surface, deserves to be told. And that the smallest voices, like Emma Bennett's uncertain childhood memory, can sometimes break open the hardest cases and bring light to the darkest corners. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.